hardly on a Harley. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Psalm 23:2, King James Version. Tiffany was an angel during those months. She stayed with me when she didn't have to. She took care of me in the middle of the night and would hold me when I had trembling fits. Her devotion made me fall deeper in love with her. Between her, my parents, my family, and close friends, I was able to slowly crawl out of the hole I was in. After the side of the bed incident happened, I called the doctor and had him prescribe a different medication. Prozac was making me crazy. He called in Zoloft, which is another antidepressant, and told me to call him after a week and let him know how it works. Thank the Lord, after about 5 days, the tremors and twitching stopped. I was finally able to at least function and get my bearings. I started eating a little more and would step outside onto my back deck and feel the sun on my face. I laid in bed for nearly a month. With hesitation, I agreed to meet up with the band out in Washington for a show. I was nowhere near ready, but Christy and the guys were wanting me to get back out there. I couldn't believe I had spent as much time as I did dealing with anxiety and depression. I wanted to at least try to get back to work. I flew out of Nashville with my Bible in hand. I muddled through the airport like a zombie and boarded my flight. Once I settled into my seat, the panic started. For the first time ever, I was scared to fly. For the next 5 hours, I was a basket case. I prayed the whole way out there. I knew I was flying into a tense situation. I would have to try to explain myself and justify why it took so much time to recover. I knew they'd be skeptical of my reasons for staying home. I had never been so fearful of a situation in all my life. When I got out there, our new road manager, Jackie Williams, met up with me. He had been hired to fill Steve's role just a few months before I became sick. He was a good dude and really tried to accommodate me. He was kind but short with me. He got me checked into my room and let me know the schedule for the day. I was picked up by a person hired by the venue later that afternoon and headed to the gig. Fear had gripped me like never before. I was so fidgety and didn't know how to tame it. I was having trouble breathing and my heart was racing a mile a minute. Inside my brain, I scolded myself. How could I be such a pansy? How could I look at myself in the mirror from now on and not see a weak, pathetic man? I remembered stepping on the stage for sound check. The guys just nodded and went about their business of setting up their gear. I played the show that night, but I don't remember any of it. I was so crazy in my head that I could hardly concentrate. Panic hit me 3 or 4 times during the set, and I thought I'd have to exit the stage. I was seriously messed up, and I honestly didn't know what to do. When I finally got back to the hotel room, reality set in. I had to continue to be out there with people that didn't like me, and I was mentally sick. I had to do something about it. What I did was out of desperation. I called our concession girl, Regina, and I asked her if she'd give me a ride to the airport since she drove our concession truck. I called my parents in Ohio and I told them I was coming home. I had already booked a red-eye flight from Washington to Cincinnati but not told any of the guys. I told my mom on the phone that I needed to see a psychologist. I was in a bad way. Regina was kind enough to meet me in the lobby and take me to the airport. I boarded the plane knowing what the consequences of my decision might be. It was a big possibility that I'd be fired from the band. I worried myself to sleep that night on the plane and woke up in the Cincinnati airport. The morning I got home, I called Christy to tell him what had happened and why I needed to fly out. He was disappointed, to say the least. I felt embarrassed for having to do what I did, but I knew I'd have been worthless out there if I had stayed. For the next 2 weeks, I stayed with Mom and Dad and saw a doctor in Cincinnati. I laid in bed and mostly just watched TV. My great-aunt Tressie came to see me along with some of my mom's prayer warriors from church, like Sister Setzer and Rosie Randazzo. They sat and prayed with me and told Satan to leave me alone. I seriously felt like the Holy Spirit was with me and that God was bringing me out of the storm. I had laid around for so long that my back was starting to hurt. I would try to get out of the house and walk around the block for some exercise. Dad would make some of his famous turkey melts and Mom whipped up some of her peanut butter fudge. The psychologist helped. It was his belief that my health condition was being caused by a chemical imbalance in my brain. It had something to do with my norepinephrine and serotonin levels. I believe all these years later he was right, but that genes also have a hand in why depression strikes some people and not others. I know my mother struggled with it all of her life. I've read where as many as 40% of those with depression can trace it to a genetic link. Research has also shown that people with parents or siblings who have depression are up to 3 times more likely to have the condition. The psychologist suggested that I needed to treat my brain just like a broken arm or leg. He said that I needed to heal, and that with the proper rest and medication, I would eventually be all right. He felt the medicine I was taking was the proper medication for me, but it just needed a little more time to get into my system. He also taught me breathing exercises when panic would hit me. He explained that the panic attacks would only last about 20 minutes each time, and the rest of the time was just me worrying. I'd sit in his office with my eyes closed while he'd talk into a tape recorder. He'd talk about positive things, like walking through an orange grove and smelling the citrus in the air. I could visualize myself being there and would start to calm down. He sent me away with the recordings and told me to play them whenever I'd get panicky. For the most part, it worked. For the next several weeks, I could feel a difference in my mood. The combination of medicine, prayer, and meditation was getting me back on my feet. Looking back on it now, I know without a shadow of a doubt that the devil used depression and fear as a spiritual weapon against me and against God. The Bible describes that there's a spiritual war raging on this earth between the forces of good and evil. It has been going on since Satan was cast down from heaven. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Ephesians 6:12, King James Version. It also says in Romans 7:22 and 23, NIV, "For in my inner being I delight in God's law, but I see another law at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within me." Clearly, depression is an effective strategy that Satan is using. He will speak against the Most High and oppress his holy people and try to change the set times and the laws. The holy people will be delivered into his hands for a time, times and a half a time. Daniel 7:25 NIV. When despair covers you up, it can be really hard to dig your way out. But being proactive and talking to your doctor and staying in the Word of God, you can do it. Through him all things are possible. Jesus said unto them, "If thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth." Mark 9:23, King James Version. I knew I couldn't stay in Fairfield for the rest of my life, so I asked Mom and Dad to drive me back down to Bellevue. It was time to address the elephant in the room, Little Texas. I wanted to explain to the guys everything that I had been through so they could see that I wasn't faking anything. When I got back, Christy called and said that the band was nominated for an award for Common Thread, the Songs of the Eagles. It was up for the Country Music Association's Album of the Year. I wanted to attend the awards with the guys, but was told they didn't want to sit by me. I put in a call to Jim Ed Norman, the president of Warner Brothers, to try to explain my situation. I wanted to give him my side of the story. I needed to tell him why I had not been out on the road with the guys and that I wanted to be there at the awards ceremony. Jim Ed was very sympathetic and let me know it'd be okay if I stayed home. He wished me well and hoped that I'd get better soon. He also hoped that the guys would understand my predicament and welcome me back into the band with open arms. After the conversation with Jim Ed, it inspired me to reunite with the guys. I called for a meeting at Christy's office on Music Row. I was nervous about it, so Dad rode down there with me. When I walked into Christy's office, the whole band was there along with Christy and Doug Grau. Christy had set up the chairs in a circle for us to be able to see each other eye to eye. Initially, everyone was closed off. No one said anything when I walked in, except for Christy and Doug. I could tell the guys were infuriated that I took several months to recover. I started first. I went through the timeline of when I first got sick. I told about the episode I had backstage of the Opry and the night Tiffany thought I was having a heart attack. I went through the list of doctors that I saw, the medications they prescribed, the side effects I experienced. I gave him the rundown of emotions I had felt, the desperation, and the disappointment in myself. I went on to describe the details of the days and nights, to make them understand that I had reached the bottom and that I was determined to find my way back to the top. I let them know I stayed home because I had to, not because I wanted to. Tears rolled down while I told my story. I don't think that I could have added anything more to my explanation. I had put it all out there. When I finished, each one of the guys chimed in. One by one, they told me how disappointed they were in me and how they had to carry the load for the last several months. One of them even said, "Someone told me they saw you out on your Harley. How sick can you be if you're riding your motorcycle?" I tried to explain that I had always found peace in riding my bike, so I thought I might try riding it. I told him that I had to turn around and head back to the house after 30 minutes because I had another panic attack. The look on his face told me he didn't believe me. Nothing I said was registering. They had already made up their minds about me. They believed I was lying. I continued to plead my case and pretty much begged them to listen to me when the final blow came. There I was with tears rolling down my face and feeling defeated when it got around to the last guy in the band's turn to talk. He looked at me with the most sincere face he could have had and said, "I still think it's a bunch of bull." It was a dagger to my heart. I had had enough. I had just exposed my deepest emotions to the guys that I had grown to love as brothers, and all I got was, "I still think it's a bunch of bull." I had gone months without hearing a word from them. I felt at that very moment they didn't care about me. I looked around and said, "Well, I guess we're done here then." I stood up and headed towards the door. I think Christy or Doug might have said, "Wait, man," or "Hold on a second." The other guys didn't say anything, but I had reached my limit. I was not going to be treated like an outcast and misfit from a bunch of guys that had their own mental issues. Enough was enough. My dad could see the anger in my eyes when I met him halfway in the parking lot. "What's wrong?" he said. "Do you want me to go in there and give him a piece of my mind?" I said, "No, Dad, just get in the truck. Let's go to the house." I didn't see the guys again for 2 years. None of them tried to reach out to me, and I didn't reach out to them. I hated leaving it unresolved. I felt sad that I wouldn't be hanging out with them anymore and playing music together. I felt bad for the fans, too. They deserved better. I felt the business had changed the dynamic of the band. Money had become the priority, but I also knew that we had formed bonds as people. We had become friends, and to me, that was what it was all about. If the guys would have only been sympathetic and given me time to get well, I think everything would have been fine. I wanted to stay, but unfortunately, that's not the way it turned out. For the next several months, I just wandered around wondering what I was going to do. I had just quit a job making 6 figures a year. Now I had nothing. I knew that I would continue to receive royalty checks in the mail, but I didn't have a direction. Thankfully, the prayers and medication were working, and I began to think straight. I would occasionally have panic attacks, but when that happened, I'd use my calming techniques to bring me back to normal. I used that time to get closer to God. I knew that even though it was hard, leaving the band was the right thing to do. Toxicity and paying the piper. I believe that God uses relationships in our lives in instrumental ways. Some of the relationships are not healthy at all. They can happen between family members, friends, co-workers, bandmates, and lovers. They teach us lessons and help us grow. They can mess with our happiness and self-esteem. They can make us feel depleted and sometimes even hopeless. The Bible tells us, "For where envying and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work." James 3:16, King James Version. Toxic relationships brings negativity and strife to those who are in it. 2 Timothy 3:1-5, King James Version says, "This know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. From such turn away." Everyone deserves a second chance, and people need grace when they make mistakes. We've all been the toxic one in the relationship at one point or the other, and by no means do I think we should just quit when times are hard. But if a friend, family, or a business relationship becomes unhealthy, it may be time to leave. The only exception would be marriage. God has different rules for that. I also learned during this time of my life that sin will catch up with you. I finally had to pay the fiddler. But if ye will not do so, behold, ye have sinned against the Lord, and be sure your sin will find you out. Numbers 32:23, King James Version. I had reached my capacity of holding on to all of the guilt. Those tremors that I felt when hanging out with random girls in hotel rooms had manifested into something more severe and intense. It literally affected my nervous system. I had to finally give it all to God. Once I did, my anxiety started to subside just like water after a storm. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Philippians 4:6-7 NIV.